It's mainly the city walls. And then you have kind of a ambiguous or anticlimactic ending to some of the solutions where it's good overall, but then in some scenarios you're like, man, that kind of hurt, or was that good, or wasn't there supposed to be something more? That's kind of a thing, Ezra, Nehemiah. That conversation will continue tonight. So we're in chapters 3 through 5, and let's say a quick word of prayer, as I think we're settled in now, and then we'll pick up in chapter 3. All right. Father, thank you for all the people who are here tonight. We know it's not easy for many of us between our schedules and health and responsibilities, so thank you for everyone's zeal to want to study your word and just be together. Help us to enjoy these moments in your scriptures, spending time in fellowship with our brothers and sisters. Be with all of our brethren who are struggling emotionally, spiritually, physically. Help us to share and show the love of Jesus to them as you've shown to all of us. Be with us now as we study Ezra and get us home safely later tonight. So in Jesus' name I pray, amen. 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 Okay, so we haven't run into Ezra yet. We're not going to meet the person Ezra tonight. We're in the book called Ezra, picking up in chapter 3. So this is where the altar is going to be built first, and then the temple's groundwork, at least the foundations, will begin. Then we're going to have a pause. Hopefully, most of you guys were able to read chapters 3, 4, and 5. That's kind of a big game for this because I don't have the time to read through all of it, though we'll read some. So verse 1 has the 7th month. So the 7th month came, and the children of Israel were in the towns. The people gathered as one man, like a congregation, to Jerusalem. Okay, verse 2, then arose Yeshua, the son of Yozadak, and his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, with his kinsmen, and they built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. They set the altar in its place there in verse 3. So we'll pick up there in verse 3 in just a second. So the 7th month, for us, we're like, oh, okay, we might start counting months from our calendar. Our calendars, not the Jewish calendar. So if you got the 7th month, this is like September, October in the Jewish calendar. It's not neatly just one or the other, but it's September, October, the beginning of fall, really. And in this month, or Tisri as it's called in the Hebrew language, this is an important month. There's a lot of really important feasts in the 7th month. The Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. You can read about that like in Leviticus 23. And that's probably has to do something with the sacrifices we'll see in verse 6 in just a second. This is roughly 538, 537 BC. We'll have some dates up on the screen here in just a minute. So that puts the timetable, and we'll point out also in just a minute that this is a time of year, not just with the feasts, but in matching up with temple dedications in the past, that is just kind of history replaying itself. But it's a very important time. It's for us, it's not the same. I wish it was better with I wish we kind of built our calendars more around religious than secular holidays. That's just my opinion. But the Jewish holidays, right, it's a theocracy. This is the holiday season, if you will, for them. Don't think Christmas as you think of it today. It's an American secular holiday. But this is like a very important time of year as all this is happening. So we should be, if you remember from Zechariah, you should be familiar with Joshua. This is just a different way they transliterated his name, Jeshua or Yeshua, the high priest. We talked about last time how, right, Joshua is Jesus' name, Yeshua, or some people make a big deal about that. Some community churches like, we only say Yeshua. It doesn't matter, same guy, Jesus. But he's the high priest. We hear about that in Zechariah and his visions, like in chapter 3 most famously. And just giving, again, some context historically what's happened, how tough their forefathers had it. So his grandfather, who we'll read about him in a genealogy in chapter 7, he was executed by King Nebuchadnezzar. You read about that in 2 Kings 25, right before everyone got yanked. Zerubbabel, remember, Zerubbabel's in the line of David. He's the governor, according to Haggai 2:21, for the Jews. And he's the grandson of King Jeconiah. who's taken into exile. You could read about that in one place in 2 Kings 24. So these are the descendants of people who were treated horrifically. Granted, their ancestors, like we've talked about, kind of earned it in some extent, but that's their past. That's their past. So the altar. What do you guys notice if you go down to verse 3? Let me read verse 3 through 6. They set the altar in its place, for fear was on them because of the peoples of the lands, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, this Yahweh, burnt offerings morning and evening, and they kept the feasts of booths or tabernacles as it is written, and offered the daily rule as each day required. And after that, the regular burnt offerings, the offerings at the new moon, and all the appointed feasts of Yahweh, and the offerings of everyone who made a freewill offering to Yahweh. From the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to Yahweh, but the foundation of the temple of Yahweh was not yet laid. Okay, it could be literally anything. I don't have anything in mind. It's not a gotcha question, just kind of like whether you think it's silly or cool, like what stands out to you in verses. We just read verses 3 through 6. What's something where you're like, oh, this stands out to me? Maybe something pops to you. What pops to you in verses 3 through 6? Let's see. I do not have a specific idea in mind. And remember, verse, it's a lot of offerings. Thank you. Okay, that's fine. That's exactly what I'm looking for, honestly, that concept. It's a lot of offerings. Again, kind of like the 7th month language, right? And so, what's the deal with that, Todd?
Oh, just their priority of the temple, the altar. One thing, as it is written, they're keeping it according to the commandments. They're getting to work as well. That's the job, right? To get back and build the temple and do those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're at the end of verse 2, verse 4. There's very diligently, at least in regards to the offerings, checking out Torah. Right here, very specifically, like these are direct instructions. We'll talk about a little bit more how specific they were. They build this altar. The verses I've cited on the screen, Genesis 12:7, from the very foundation of Israel, Abraham, right? He builds an altar to God. In Genesis 12, Genesis chapter 12 is a good chapter, not to memorize word for word. I mean, if you do, that'd be great as well. But just to remember, Deuteronomy 12 is the promise and commandment from God to the Israelites that when you come into the promised land, there will be one place for you to have worship. And so here we are back at that one place. It's been destroyed, but we're back there. There should be an altar there and all that. Anything else stand out? Verses 2, 3 through 6 that stood out to you? A lot of sacrifices. They're diligent as it's written. Yes?
It's interesting that they're kind of scared to start doing it. And that it's like, well, once you start, you're kind of exposing yourself when they start redoing the temple worship. Yeah, remember that phrase. I don't have it on the screen. Fear was on them, and here's the phrase I want you to remember, because the peoples of the lands. A lot of time, as a kid, I don't know how old, I pictured that the whole place was vacant. That is not the case. No one's really that powerful. Compared to the Israelites or the Jews, they're going to be powerful, but there's still people meandering around. We'll come back to them in a few minutes, but there's fear in doing this. They're vulnerable. Yes, Lynn?
One of the things I noticed was, and I don't know why, you would think they'd build a foundation first and then put the altar on the foundation.
Yes.
They do not.
Yes.
They build the altar. Not that that's weird, because you pointed out several cases where altars were built, but I don't know, it just struck me as kind of odd. Why wouldn't they build at least part of the foundation? And maybe they did.
I've got it pulled up. I think it'll be on the bottom. But David, when they come to what becomes the city of David, they come to Jerusalem, David does the same thing, where he sets up an altar and offers sacrifices in Jerusalem before the temple's built. So we've seen that happen before. Well, you could ask yourself, it's a good question, why is that the case, right? That's an astute observation. We're offering sacrifices according to the law before there's even a temple. Okay, Cass?
I think it's kind of strange that, like you said, they offered it with fear, they're vulnerable. The Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles, is supposed to be the most joyful feast they have.
It's supposed to be, yeah, it's a very joyful feast. Remember the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles? I had a professor who had a thick Tennessee accent, by the way, and he'd say, the Feast of Booze. And I was like, what is he saying? A Feast of Booze? I'm like, that doesn't sound right. Couldn't hear it. So Feast of Booths. tabernacles, right? They would all leave their brick and mortar homes, if you will, and go live out in a tent, right? To remind them, hey, God preserved us when we're out in the wilderness. So it's a time of celebration of God's faithfulness toward their people.
You know, could you think of it another way of the fear of the people? They're coming back into this land. They don't know these people. So they're relying on God. So they want to get those altars built to get the sacrifices so that they know that they've got God's protection. So I looked at it kind of that way.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, I like that. Yeah, the fear of the people, again, that'll come back in chapter 4. Because of that, they're like, hey, we want to be in God's favor. Doesn't necessarily have to be a brute exchange of goods as of God, give me this. But there could be faith. I think obviously there's clearly faith going on here because they're going back to the law. Now, the altar in its place, again, you could go back to Deuteronomy 12. But the altar, here, I'll just read it for us. But if I go back to Exodus, come on, Bible. If I go back to Exodus 29, well, this is also going to get connected with the offerings that are morning and evening. But I'll just read verse 43 of Exodus 29. So this is talking about the burnt offerings on the altar. In Exodus 29:43, God says, I will also meet with the Israelites there, and that place will be consecrated by my glory. So the tabernacle and later the temple obviously has the altar. We haven't even built the temple yet or rebuilt the temple yet. But this is where God promises, through the altar and the sacrificial system and the temple, where God promises where we will have this heaven-earth relationship, where I will come and we will have a fellowship, a covenant. And the burnt offerings morning and evening, you could go read like Exodus 29, Numbers 28 a bit. For the morning and evening. This was every single day. A lamb of 1 year, of just 1 year, with oil and other ingredients was offered in the morning and in the evening, including on Sabbath. Even on the Sabbath, that was supposed to happen in the law. But the point is, and Todd was kind of getting at this, that very detailed around the sacrificial system, they're very careful to read, apply, and study the law. And the Feast of Tabernacles, again, in verse 4, which was Cass talking about, supposed to be a very joyous time. Numbers 29, 12 through 38. It's a good place to go check that out. As it is written, they're observing the feasts as well. So it's the sacrifices. It is the feasts. The regular burnt offerings is probably what we heard in verse 3, the day, every morning, every evening. New moon, like we're seeing right now, so in this new month, you go read Numbers 28, 11 through 15. And when the new moon, for them, we hear that, and people are like, is this astrology or something? No, the stars and the moon and all that tells them, what time of year it is and whatnot. It's how you keep track of your calendar. And so when it's a new month, there's a set of sacrifices that the law prescribes. Again, it's very all-inclusive language of all appointed feasts, free will offerings, could be really anything. It's not just animal sacrifice, so that was probably the most common. Free will offering is not obviously explicitly stated out in the law of what it looks like. It's a free will offering. Whatever you want and have to give to God, you just do. We definitely see that in the sense financially, but in other ways as well in the new covenant, that everything we offer God in that sense is a free will offering. But everything is in close attention in accordance with the law. And as was astutely pointed out by Lynn, the sacrificial system is reinstated before the reconstructed temple. Very interesting. Which, like I said already, King David does this. He sets up the altar system, and according to the law, the sacrificial system before the temple is put in place, which of course his son Solomon would build. Yes?
Isn't the Feast of Booths, Tabernacles, all that, isn't it 5 days after the Day of Atonement?
Yeah, it comes right after the Day of Atonement is a bit more somber, perhaps, is what it seems like, and kind of nerve-wracking because you're like, oh, let's hope this goes well, and that the high priest and everyone doesn't mess this up, quite frankly. I don't know if that's the right attitude, but everyone's supposed to be praying that day. It's the only day where the whole nation is commanded to have a fast, I believe. So it's a very somber day of focus. And then what follows with this is rejoicing.
Well, the problem is they couldn't have a Day of Atonement without the temple, without the Ark of the Covenant, without all of those things that they didn't have. So
Yeah, it is.
The Tabernacles, but they didn't have the Day of Atonement.
Yeah, it seems they could not have done the Day of Atonement yet. Yeah, that's a good point. But overall, it's positive. There is a sense of fear right now of we're very vulnerable. There's those other guys out there. But overall, very, very positive. I thought this was interesting. Looking at altars throughout the Bible, some of these things are huge. Their altar is probably something a lot humbler, but like, you start out like with Moses and the like, and then you've got out in the wilderness, it gets better and better. I mean, Solomon's was crazy. This is what's outlined in the new temple in Ezekiel 43, which is interesting. I was looking into it. King Herod's temple, which is just way better additions to the one we're about to read that's beginning to be rebuilt in the days of Jesus. King Herod's altar was bigger than the Ezekiel 43 outline. I think that's interesting and also kind of telling about the Jews' mindsets that they thought they were bringing in this new temple that Ezekiel was prophesying about, which we know has to do with Christ and the church ultimately. It's interesting to me that they don't just rebuild that in Herod's day, according to Ezekiel. They build something even bigger than this. But like Solomon's temple, look at that. I mean, that is grand. Remember how grand Solomon's stuff was? Remember that for the rest of this chapter. So if you pick up verse 7, verse 7 is the standard pay for workers. I'm moving on to verse 8. So now we're in the second year after they're coming to the house of God at Jerusalem, or what's left of it. In the second month, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Yeshua, the son of Yozadak, made a beginning, together with the rest of their kinsmen, the priests and the Levites, and all who had come to Jerusalem from the captivity. They appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to supervise the work of the house of Yahweh. So this is now in the springtime. So we're in the next year. We're in the next year into springtime, 7 or so months later. The second month, Ziv, is the same time that Solomon began to build the temple, like in 1 Kings 6:1. So the pattern's matching the same thing. What's interesting, that age, 20 years old or older, if you're a male Levite, to help out in the leadership of all this. In the law, in Numbers 8:24, the age was 25. Here they lower the age to 20. Which I think is probably telling that there's just less of them. Actually, Cass, we were talking about that. There's a lot less of them. So it seems to be, my guesstimation is there's less of them. So they're like, well, we got to lower the age to 20. It was 25, now it's 20, which is fascinating. And because in the law, and sometimes in the New Testament, we have this view as well, and it's a whole nother discussion. It's just like a black and white example or command that they have of, well, it's 25. And now they get into this situation and they're like, well, now what? And they lower it. But it's a very practical reason as to why they do it. I don't want to spend too much time talking about him. I'll put him, Kadmiel is a notable Levite. He stands on the platform later when the law is being read, like you read about in Nehemiah 9. He's one of the guys who signs on to this recommitment to the covenant in Nehemiah 10. We don't have too much more said about him, but he's a very notable leader and Levite. And the Levites, right, they're overseeing this temple project and this temple work. Now, verses 10 and 11. So you have Yeshua, verse 9, with his family. Kadmiel, who I just put on the screen, they're supervising. Verse 10, and when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of Yahweh, the priests in their vestments came forward with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, right, a lot of psalms by Asaph and his sons, okay, with cymbals. Why? Well, it's to praise the Lord according to the directions of David, king of Israel, and they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to Yahweh, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever toward Israel. A lot of the Psalms say that. You can see some quotations there. It's all over the Old Testament. Now, this is almost verbatim, or it echoes 2 Chronicles 5:13. And 2 Chronicles 5, right, this is celebrating when the ark is coming back into, or not coming back, for the first time coming into the city. So that's how good all this is supposed to be. That this is, with the Ark of the Covenant, it was a representative, and there was a truth to it to a certain extent. The Ark of the Covenant represented God's presence, right? They don't have the Ark of the Covenant anymore, but the rejoicing is the same as all the way back then in 2 Chronicles 5. Like, this is a fantastic day when you hear this language being echoed. And according to David, 1 Chronicles 16 and other passages, David largely is the one who organized the worship on the temple grounds itself. Again, they're being very diligent to follow what they have written and what has been taught to their ancestors. Very, very diligent. But famously, let's talk about this, verses 12 and 13. The end of, I'll keep reading the middle of verse 11, the quotation, he's good, his steadfast love endures forever toward Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised Yahweh, because the foundation of the house, that's the temple of Yahweh, was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' houses, old men, these guys have to be well over 50 years old, who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid, though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. For the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away. So the old people, the old men, they'd seen the first temple as very young individuals. They weep and shout out in agony at the sight of how meager and measly looking this foundation is compared to what the new Solomon's temple. Everyone else, right, in light of like 2 Chronicles 5:13, everyone else is having a good old time. And this will keep coming up with Ezra and Nehemiah. I'm just trying to kind of, be a news anchor and tell you, here's what people say. Again, there's a lot of different angles of how people, preachers I know, commentaries, scholars of how they view this. What do you think is being communicated with the people weeping? Obviously, what the text says is, they're kind of disappointed that this is nothing like, clearly this is going to be nothing like, just looking at the foundation, Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple was insane. This one doesn't look like it's going to be that. But do you guys view this in a positive sense? Is it a negative light of them? Or is it just a neutral historical thing? What do you guys think about that? Ricky, you got a hand?
Yeah, I was thinking that it may be, they're torn, on both directions, because they know the history of the people that has gone before them, and are we doing it right? Can we continue to do what God says? If we don't, maybe.
You think there's a sense of fear if they're being
The fear,
obedience?
yeah, obedience.
Okay, interesting. So maybe repentant. Okay, someone else? Yeah, maybe. Someone else want to add on to that? What do you guys think about them weeping? Or is it just, Todd, do you have a thought?
Well, your picture in the last Solomon's temple compared to what's happening is, makes them so despondent about this. And these old men, you said 50, wouldn't it be 70?
I said well over 50 years old. They'd be like 70 or 80.
Well, they would have seen that then, and they would have seen what was there before. And so, yeah, I suppose it's like anything, you lose something so wonderful, then you have to start from scratch. That would make them despondent, I suppose.
Sure, yeah, I agree with that. Cass, you have Cynthia.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say I'm not sure if it mentions it, but if they kept bringing up the other one was better or something like that all the time.
It seems,
I feel like, if they saw something that was more amazing than the new temple, we call it that, it's gotta be gut wrenching, but at the same time, I don't see that as bad unless they keep holding on to that emotion, and every time someone brings something else, they'll be like, the old temple was better, or,
you may be more right than you know. Roger had a one-off night back in February looking at Haggai. Haggai, if you read it, is in Zechariah 5. He's going to show up multiple years from now to rebuild the temple. So 15-ish years after what we're reading right now, Haggai shows up, and in Haggai 2:3, it's cited on the screen, but I'm reading it here. He said to them, "Who's left among you who saw this house in its former glory? How do you see it now? Is it not as nothing in your eyes?" And yet he tells them, "Be strong, O Zerubbabel, declares Yahweh. Be strong, O Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Be strong, all you people in the land." Right, to get back to it. So it seems like older people, or Zechariah 4:14, Zechariah says that maybe he's hinting at this, that you've despised the day of small things. Maybe he's talking about this as well. Seems to be that their attitude, I don't know if lack of faith is the right term or not, but their attitude is like, this is it. There's no way this could work out. How could we be restored to the days of Solomon? And maybe they become kind of bitter about it. Some people are like, are they being materialistic? I don't know. Some people offer, is this ominous foreshadowing, which we'll get to in a few weeks. the easiest thing for me is looking at Haggai and Zechariah. They seem to be commentating on this attitude, which is, hey, it may look unimpressive to you, but let's have some faith here. God's going to get it done. Yeah.
I would guess that it's not like a matter of them just feeling like, oh, the other one was so nice and so majestic, and this one.
I agree.
It's more just the fact that like this is a shadow of what used to be, like maybe like, and we didn't even have this for a long time. It's a sadness of like the journey in the fall, right? That we represent.
I concur. Man, it cuts it. Well, it's just, okay. So the term Second Temple found is it, as biblical scholars commonly use it today. I just want you guys to know this language. Second Temple refers to both the Restoration Temple we're reading about right now and the Herodian Temple that followed it. That's Jesus' day. The Second Temple underwent changes occasionally. The major changes taking place as a result of Herod's renovations. That was like 500 years, 400 something years later. These improvements were still in progress in our Lord's day, Jesus' day. The Second Temple stood from 515 BC, which we'll get to in chapter 6, verse 15, hopefully next week, until the Romans destroyed it in AD 70. Okay, when Herod renovates it, renovation may be an understatement, but he pretty much builds a new one. But it's with this stuff here. So anytime you hear the Second Temple, you got to ask yourself or find out if you're reading something, well, that spans a long period of time, right, over 500 years. You may also hear terminology like Second Temple Jewish literature, and that's going to mean stuff that's written between the Old and New Testament as we know it. Books you may have heard of like Maccabees and Enoch and the like, just tidbits of information. But this is where the Second Temple begins, and it gets a lot better in Jesus' day. And ironically, though, spoiler alert, the people aren't really doing that much better, despite the temple looking great in Jesus' day. But we got the altar, and now the foundation of the temple is being laid out. Okay, now here comes opposition. So chapter 4, verse 1. Now, when the adversaries or enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to Yahweh, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of fathers' houses and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do. And we've been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Yeshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses in Israel said to them, "You have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to Yahweh, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us." Okay, verse 4, the response. Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the end of Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. All right, so here's the situation. From chapter 4 on out, the rest of Ezra is opposition in different kinds of ways, but here on out, it's just an uphill battle. We just got opposition. So of Judah and Benjamin are the two tribes. The 10 are gone, right? The lost 10 tribes as people get into all sorts of weird theories. But we got Judah and Benjamin who've returned, who've been faithful to worshiping God alone, Yahweh alone, in the temple, and faithful to the Davidic line. And so they're building the temple, and I think it's worth noting the enemies heard, right? They heard about this. I think there's a play with the language, because in chapter 3, verse 12, oh no, it should be 3:13. It always bugs me when I do this. Do things too fast. I have to fix this. It's driving me crazy. But in 3:13, it talks about people heard the shout from far away. And so I think just the message, there we go. I think just the message is, word spreads fast when you got people celebrating really hard in Jerusalem for what's going on. And this is perhaps a threat to these outsiders, right? Now it says they wish to help build the temple. Why? Okay, well, they say we worship the Lord, Yahweh, right? Since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. Okay, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? Bible history. Someone besides Todd. Todd, I know you're smiling over there. Anyone remember what they're talking about? Otherwise, we will go to Todd. Mitchell? No one? We don't know? Okay, so no one wants to answer. So we're going all the way back to remember what nation took out the northern kingdom of Israel? What nation was that? Anyone remember? Just shout it out if you know. Who took out the northern kingdom? What?
Assyria.
Yes, so the Assyrians took out Israel. Remember, the Assyrians are the one who circled Jerusalem Hezekiah intercedes, and God's angel wipes out the Assyrians, and Jerusalem survives another day until Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, right? And then after the Babylonians, the Persians, Cyrus lets them go home, so we're in the Medo-Persian Empire right now. So what we're talking about, you can go read 2 Kings 17:24, and FF, it just means keep reading forward. So the people who are here say, yeah, we worship Yahweh. Do you guys remember? It's a really obscure story, so this would be like extra points, just Bible trivia stuff. You guys remember what happens when the people, the 10 tribes in the northern kingdom are taken into captivity? But it wasn't just them who were moved. The Assyrians moved people all over the place. They moved foreigners into the northern kingdom of Israel as well. Does anyone remember what happens? It's a weird story with that one.
Crazy evidence.
Yeah. So because the people aren't worshiping Yahweh, lions are sent on the people. It's a really bizarre story. And so the king of Assyria is like, hey, we need to get a priest who knows the law. And so that way this whole weird lion situation stops. And that's because in the ancient mind, and there's some biblical truth to it, though God's going to say all of it's mine, which is, right, the gods are very geographical to much of the ancient world. So the Assyrian king was like, wow, the God of the Israelites is really acting up. We need a priest. And whatever that priest does, you go read 2 Kings 17 and beyond, he does teach them about Yahweh. They do worship and fear Yahweh. So what these people are saying is somewhat true. But as 2 Kings 17 concludes with, but they also serve other gods as well. So Yahweh stands in this, I guess you could call it a pantheon of gods. And of course, the Jews are really the leaders, the heads of the household's response is, you've got nothing to do with us in building a temple. And remember, this group because there's probably a smattering of some of Abraham's seed left in the northern or southern kingdom. We don't know all the details. But remember, this is how Samaria becomes the Samaritans, right? These are the group of people with this mixed bag of idolatry in the background and intermingling, marrying Gentiles. This is part of the hostility or the reasons for hostility in Jesus' day, are these guys. So these are Old Testament Samaritans, you could say, here with Ezra showing up. And they say, hey, we worship the same God as you. And so this is where people are like, okay, was it right for him to shoo him away or not? I'm guessing everyone in this room, I'm looking at the clock. I'm going to go ahead and say most of us, including myself, my initial reaction is, oh, yeah, there's more dangers that are going to come in the future, like intermarriage and idolatry, because they're introduced as enemies in verse 1. They're called enemies or adversaries. And like I said already in 2 Kings 17, they fear Yahweh, but they also worship other gods. And then once you hit verse 4, it seems like, oh yeah, here's their intentions revealed. Now they do everything to try and stop the reconstruction of the temple and everything that follows. I was surprised at how many in scholarship, and not just in scholarship, but how many preachers I personally know and whatnot, scouring Facebook chats and stuff, typing in words, finding that there are a handful, it's a minority position, but I'd say like a quarter of people, I'm just bald, minority position, though a notable position of people. Some people think this was the wrong response, and they think verse 1 is saying this is how they became adversaries, and if you were listening to Zechariah, like Zechariah 2, 10, and 11 says, many nations will come and worship Yahweh, and then God will dwell in their midst, that they should have seen this and said, hey, here are the many nations wanting to rebuild the temple with us, we should let them in. So some people take that route. I'm inclined to take the former, that this was the right response. Mitchell, go ahead.
I'm going to just defer to Proverbs 15:1.
Okay, let's read Proverbs 15:1.
A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
Okay.
They could have been a little bit
They could have done better.
They could have been more constructive in their answer, because as a result, they just made a bunch of people mad at them.
Mm-hmm. So Proverbs 15:1, if you didn't hear it, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So this is the tension I was talking about last week. Ben and I were discussing as he preached on Nehemiah last year, and we'll keep talking about it, is, hey, are these guys really good or really bad? A lot of people, I said last week, I'll say it again, just a reminder, some people, including people I know who are preachers in the church, think these guys are kind of like the job gets done despite them and God works through it. Other people are like, they're perfect and like everything is to be imitated. And it's like, I lean more toward they do more good than bad. But yeah, what Mitchell pointed out, Proverbs 15:1, maybe they could have handled this better. But some people who think this is the wrong response and looking at the prophecies are saying, you could have educated them more and told them, hey, Yahweh can't be worshipped with these other idols. Join us in worshiping only Yahweh. You've got Yahweh, but you should only serve Yahweh. I don't know, it's a muddled thing. I think verse 1, in my opinion, I could very well be wrong. I think verse 1 is telling us that these guys are suspect from the get-go. But it definitely, maybe they could have handled it a little bit differently. That's for sure. Any thoughts about that? I mean, that's kind of like a big thing going on. Cynthia?
Yeah, no, I do think they should have said no, because I feel like if they helped build it, they would feel entitled maybe to bring in the other gods they worship. So it's like, hey, we helped build this one.
Oh, for sure.
We should bring in some of ours.
Yeah, that's what I'm leaning towards, Cynthia, which is, here you go, Mitchell, I stole your idea. There you go, Proverbs 15:1. Good job. That's a nice answer. But yeah, that's what I lean toward, which is reasonable. You guys worship all these other gods, and we're going to see these intermarriages that has to do, it's not about a race thing, it's about worshiping idols and other gods. I think there's a genuine fear. But hopefully they're not stretching this into something that, in thinking about application today, is really tricky to trust other people and your neighbors, and sometimes for good reason. Todd?
Well, they're getting back, this is a brand new thing, they got the Levites, the priests, they're trying to follow what's going on, what they're supposed to do as far as how to rebuild things, so I think they're really paying attention to detail, and don't want to muddle things up, I guess. I mean, that could be
That's what I'm inclined to think.
a reason.
That's what I'm inclined to think, for sure. So remember verse 4, the people of the land, and again, I didn't have room for it. Some people think the people of the land, depending on context, sometimes, I think a dozen times I was reading in the Old Testament, that refers to the Israelites. But the people of the land in the immediate context was used back in chapter 3, and that was the people they were fearful of. So again, that's why I'm more inclined to think they're suspect, even if they could have handled it better. But the enemies in verse 6, they even write to Ahasuerus. Remember that guy? Esther's good-for-nothing husband. They write to that guy. It seems nothing happens. That guy's busy with all sorts of campaigns. It seems like they don't get a response or anything. Now, this is important. Verses 6 through 23 of chapter 4 records events that happen 50-plus years after verses 1 through 5. Ezra is writing much later, and so I don't have time to talk about this. We'll talk about it next week. But verses 6 through 23 is bracketed and by verses 4 and 5 and verse 24. Remember, we called them bookends. It's called an inclusio. It's a technical scholarly term, an inclusio. But you can call them bookends or brackets, because verses 4 and 5 and verse 24 repeat the same thing, that the work stops until Darius, the king of Persia. So it's kind of like the author. Some people think it's Ezra, hence the name Ezra. Maybe it's Ezra writing it. It's like the author pauses and takes you through, here's everything that's going to happen to him, and then he jumps back and we're back to the story with Zerubbabel. So Ahasuerus, right, he's the king in Esther, 486 to 465. And then you have Artaxerxes, he's 464 to 423, right? All these are BC. And a lot of other people think this is probably the king Artaxerxes, probably the Persian king that reigns from Ezra chapter 7 to the end of Nehemiah. That's what I'm convinced of, though I'm not opposed to alternate ideas. We'll talk more later about some chronological questions going on. But then once you get to verse 8, all the way to chapter 6, verse 18, it switches from Hebrew to Aramaic. Okay, some people, and it does this also in the middle of chapter 7 of Ezra as well. The other section, famously, where Aramaic is bracketed by Hebrew, is in Daniel. Daniel 2:4 through 7:28. This is termed, the phraseology that I found helpful was Royal Aramaic. What is the language that Jesus is speaking day to day? 500 Aramaic. Only the religious elites of Jesus' day spoke Hebrew. Only the educated. It's kind of sad. But Aramaic is kind of like what Greek became, thanks to Alexander the Great. In Mesopotamia, Aramaic became the standard language. I call it Royal Aramaic because if you wanted to communicate with others, the universal language was Aramaic. Today, the closest thing to that would be English. I don't know if that's a perfect analogy, but a lot of people, there's a reason why more people can speak English in China than the United States. The Chinese know we want to be able to do business with the West, with the Americans. You're going to speak English. Kind of a similar thing here. This is just the common language. It's written. You'll notice in verse 11, by the way, in this letter, and I'll talk about these guys and we'll just have to be done. This is a copy of the letter that they sent. So it's very diligent historical inquiry. So basically verse 9 is a long list of notable people from notable places. Erech is a famous place that's founded by Nimrod in Genesis 10, who may or may not be connected with the Nephilim and the mighty men of renown, AKA these are places of enemies of the Jewish people of old, people from Susa. Susa was the capital at times of the Persian Empire, like in Esther and Nehemiah. It's basically, verse 9 is a list of very notable people, of very important places in history, of why you should listen to us. And they say, hey, the Jews have come up from you. They've left exile and they've come out here. And by the way, this is the first time the term Jews are used in Ezra and Nehemiah. But what they're referring to as the Jews who've come up from you this is skipping ahead to chapter 7. Remember, verses 6 through 23 is skipping ahead in time in the story, and then it's going to come back to the story we're currently reading with Zerubbabel. I know that's a little bit confusing, but when he says the Jews who've come up, we know he's talking about Ezra's band in 458, which is the beginning of chapter 7, because there it's not just the temple that's being rebuilt, it's Jerusalem, okay? And we know that starts to happen later. And basically in verse 13, they say, look, if Jerusalem and all this is rebuilt, Persia, its empire, you're going to lose all your taxes. You're going to lose money because of this. The Jewish people are going to be rebellious. And they're kind of right. They're like, hey, look back in history, like with what happened to Nebuchadnezzar and stuff, like he had to have a siege, even though Jeremiah the prophet told him, hey, surrender, it'll go better for you. They didn't do that. They're like, hey, go check out the records, king. These guys are a rowdy bunch. You shouldn't trust them. And if you let them do this, they say they're going to take all of the land west of the river. Remember, the river language in your Bibles is the Euphrates. That goes right through the heart of Mesopotamia. And basically they're saying the only time Israel really had, not really, the only time Israel had all the land really west of the Euphrates and was that big and powerful was Solomon. They were looking pretty big and bad and scary in the time of Solomon, economically and militarily speaking. But these are kind of outlandish remarks, I think, because they're such a small band of people. God can do whatever he wants. But from a secular point of view from these guys, it's kind of ridiculous, I think, to say, hey, if you don't let these guys rebuild this, they're going to take the whole western part of the empire. It's very dramatic from my estimation. We'll just have to pick up here next week. I'll throw on the rest of what I have here. So the king is going to order the Jews to stop building. This is really bad news. You're like, what happened? Cyrus told us to go to rebuild. Now the king sends a letter back and tells them you need to stop. But the king does say, it's not all over. The king's going to say, I'm going to review the matter. We're going to check this out. I'll get back to you. But for now, you need to stop. So from the big guy himself out on the other side of the river, the king says, you need to stop. This is really bad news. I will come back right to this slide because I don't want us to miss the bracketing of 6 through 23. But verse 24 is going to pick up from verse 5. So for next week, if you haven't already, you got bailed out in chapter 5 tonight. If you haven't already, read chapter 5. We're going to hit up 5 through 7. That's what we'll call it. We're going to go 5 through 7. So if you could please read Nehemiah 5, 6, 7. It'll take you 10 minutes or so for next week. That would be great. All right, we're done. Thank you for the participation.